Good afternoon. So I want to start with a short exercise. You guys all may know me from a bio that you read in the program, or you may have heard my name in other contexts, or you may not really know me at all. What I want you to do is think of 5 words that describe me. Can be any 5 words, and I'll give you a second to think about it. So it's sort of funny thinking about describing somebody who we don't really know. But if you think about it, this is something that we all do every day. You see somebody walking down the street, and you make assumptions or judgments about them just by looking at them. You might notice if they're well-dressed or if they're kind of disheveled. Maybe they're wearing all black, or wearing a sports jersey, or they're wearing a really nice suit. You might notice if they're really attractive, or maybe not so attractive. Whether good or bad, we all do this. And my hope today is that I can get you to think twice about those assumptions that we make every day when we see people. So here are my 5 words, and let me tell you, it was really hard to come up with 5 words that I felt like defined me, that really captured who I was. So my first is mother, athlete, introvert, and let me tell you, introverts don't always love getting up on stage and giving presentations. Happy, and role model. Now, none of these 5 words may have to do with why I'm sitting here today, and I'm sitting here today because of a turning point that my life took almost 13 years ago. But my hope today is to prove that that turning point isn't what defines me. So to do that, I want to give you guys a little bit of context. From as young as I can remember, I was an athlete, and I came from a family of athletes. My dad was a 3-sport athlete here at Middlebury, and then he coached the Alpine Ski Team for 10 years after that. And my mom was an incredible ski racer. She raced on the International World Cup circuit for a number of years, as well as in the 1976 Innsbruck Olympics. And when I was a kid, I tried to get into every sport that I could. I played soccer and basketball, and softball and lacrosse, and I did swimming and tennis and golf, and of course I was a ski racer. And even as a kid, I felt like I was defined as being an athlete, and I identified that way. And I made assumptions about other kids based on my perception of their athletic abilities. When I was in high school, I played soccer and lacrosse all 4 years, and I continued to ski race at a national and international level. My junior and senior year in high school, I skied in the US National Championships, and I was continuing to climb the national rankings. But ultimately, I wanted to go to college and ski race in college. So I came to Middlebury. And even as a freshman, I was contributing to the ski team in the intercollegiate ski races. And my sophomore year was similar. This is a picture of me actually skiing for Middlebury. The 4th race of the year, my sophomore year, was the best race in my career. And it would also turn out to be the last one that I would finish. So I want to pause for a second, because everything that I've talked about so far is my childhood and growing up and really identifying as an athlete. Those physical attributes and physical qualities, that's just how I saw everything. And all of that changed for me in a moment. So it was a Saturday, and it was a giant slalom race. It had rained the day before and frozen overnight, which made perfect conditions for ski racing. And it was a bright and sunny day, but kind of cold and blustery. And I remember pushing out of the starting gate and skiing the top half of the course perfectly, thinking I had skied it exactly as I needed to. And about halfway down, I came over a knoll and got spun around backwards. I'm not exactly sure how that happened, but I remember going backwards down the hill and thinking that I was going to hit the next gate. And that's really the last thing that I remember. I have a few snapshot memories of being in the emergency room and just prior to surgery, but my next full memory is waking up in the intensive care unit. I was laying in a hospital bed. I had a tube down my throat to help me breathe, which meant I couldn't talk. And my family was standing around me, and I was motioning to them, "What happened?" They explained to me that after I fell, I got thrown off the trail, and I hit a lift tower with my back, and I broke my back. I had just come out of 10 hours of emergency surgery to realign my spine. I had major damage to my spinal cord, causing a spinal cord injury, and I was paralyzed from the chest down. So I spent the next 2.5 weeks in the hospital recovering from some of these injuries before being moved to a rehab hospital out in Colorado that specialized in spinal cord injuries. And before going to rehab, they sent us this video that was about rehab and sort of what you were going to be doing and what to expect. And my family tells me that that was the first time that I cried after my accident. And the reason that that hit me so hard was because I saw all of these people using wheelchairs, and I was thinking, that can't be me. How could that possibly be me? I had all of these assumptions that I didn't even realize about these people and what their lives must be like or what their lives could be like, and I didn't see how I could fit into that. But it was in rehab that I really learned how to live my life. And I had to start really small. It was putting my shirt on, getting pants on. It was sitting up in bed and getting from my bed into my wheelchair, and even just using my wheelchair. And learning little tricks like doing wheelies to help make certain things easier. And as I was learning all of these little things, I started to realize that maybe my life didn't have to be so different. And maybe those assumptions that I had about all of those people that I saw in that video, maybe those weren't necessarily accurate. But the real turning point came for me when I learned about adaptive sports. Prior to this, I had this huge void because I felt like this huge part of my life that felt like my whole life was gone. And I felt like that wasn't going to be able to be part of my life anymore. And that was being an athlete. When I first got on a hand cycle and I learned about adaptive skiing and biking and tennis and golf and basketball and even rugby, it opened my eyes up to what my life could be like and made me realize that maybe my life doesn't need to be so different. Maybe it's just going to look a little bit differently. But really for me, it was all about skiing. And if I wasn't a skier, then who was I? So the next winter after my accident, I got back up on the hill and learned how to monoski. This is actually a picture of my first day monoskiing, which I actually really hate because it was both the first and the last day that I had a person holding on to me and helping me ski. It really looks more like this now. But for me, being back up on the hill with my teammates and my family and friends was a huge step in getting closer to feeling like myself again and getting back to my old life. And that's all I really wanted. I wanted to get back to being me, to living my life. And a big step for me in that was being a college kid and coming back to Middlebury. And when I had my accident, I know that it was news on campus. As you guys know, Middlebury is a small place. So when something like this happens, it was kind of a big deal, and a lot of people heard about it. And I know people wondered who I would be, and if I would be the same Kelly that they knew before. And if they didn't know me before, could they or should they talk to me? It's really hard to talk to a random stranger. It's even harder to talk to somebody who's different than you in some way. And what I tried to do was just show them that I was the same person. Because really I was. What was different? I'm using a wheelchair and wheeling instead of walking. I maybe take a little bit longer to get dressed or take a shower, but honestly, only my roommates really knew that. But otherwise, I was the same person, and it was my goal to show people that. So after I returned to Middlebury, I ended up graduating on time with my original class. I took a little bit of time after I graduated to figure out exactly what I wanted to do and ended up going back to grad school to be a nurse practitioner. And during grad school, I got married, and in 2016, we had a baby. She's now 2.5-year-old. And I'm pregnant again and having another baby in March, which I know is going to make our lives a little bit more crazy. But I work as a nurse practitioner, and I'm the leader of the Kelly Brush Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization that I started after my accident to help people with spinal cord injuries live active and engaged lives. And I practice what I preach. I ski as much as I can in the winter. I bike, both mountain and road bike, in the spring, summer, and fall. This is a picture of me and my family at the top of Snake Mountain, not far from here. And I play tennis and golf, and I constantly try to find new ways to be active. So now you guys have learned a lot more about me. What I want you to do is think back on those 5 words that you thought of at the beginning, And think about whether or not they're still accurate. And I guess more important than that, are they still the ones that you would choose? So much of our first impressions of people are always physical, which makes sense, right? We're not mind readers. We can't look at somebody and know everything about them. But how much do those physical appearances really tell us about who somebody is? So here are my 5 words again. And if you notice, I didn't list disabled in there at all. That's just not how I feel like I'm defined. That's just how I think about myself. But to ask somebody who hardly knows me to not acknowledge my wheelchair is also unrealistic. It's a big part of me, after all. I often have people tell me that I'm inspiring or that I'm an inspiration, which doesn't sound very modest to say, I know. But it sometimes comes from people who know me well and sometimes comes from total strangers. And I think often it comes from people who aren't used to seeing somebody in a wheelchair executing day-to-day tasks. And they think that I either can't or I won't do these things because of my disability. I one time had this guy come up to me. I was walking up a hill or wheeling myself up a hill, and he came up to me and said, "You're so amazing and so inspiring." But why was that inspiring? I was just doing an everyday thing. I was walking up a hill. And for all he knows, I could have been coming from around the corner selling drugs to some kids, and I was on my way to rob a bank, which obviously was not true. But a lot of people have a hard time being called inspiring because they're just doing these everyday things. But that ignores the fact that I am doing some things a little bit differently. And let's be honest, me wheeling myself up that hill was harder than somebody else walking up it. But this is a big debate in the disabled community. There are some people who don't want to be called inspiring because they're just living their life. But if somebody looks at me and sees me doing something a little bit differently because I'm in a chair, and they find that inspiring, I'm okay with that. I acknowledge the difference and even the novelty of what they're seeing. But I hope that the next time that they see me or somebody else doing something similar, I hope that that will seem a little bit more normal to them, and they will start to see me and the person who I am and not just my wheelchair. Because what I hope people recognize is that my wheelchair is just one small part of me. It doesn't define me. So if you think of 5 words to describe me, my wheelchair can be one of them, but I hope it's last. It's always important to think about and talk about the person first. And this goes for everything. It's not just for disabilities. This goes for all kinds of identifying features. And we hear about it all the time, right? So it's things like when we hear about like people of color, or rather than saying a cancer patient, we say a person who has cancer. So instead of referring to me and saying Kelly is a wheelchair user, you say Kelly is a person who uses a wheelchair. I don't want to be like the PC police here, but I do think it's an important distinction and a good one to focus on. I sometimes have people tell me that they're nervous to talk to somebody in a wheelchair because they don't know what to say, or they don't want to say the wrong thing, or they don't want to offend them. My advice is always, an awkward interaction is better than no interaction at all. I often will have people come up to me and offer help for things that I do every day, like getting my chair in and out of my car, or opening doors, things like that. And I don't need the help, but I always appreciate the offer. The more that people can offer help or speak to somebody outside of their comfort zone, the easier it gets the next time. And the more that we talk to people that are different than us in some way, the more that we start to see the person and who they truly are, and not just that snap judgment that we make when we first see them. And what's almost always true is that we start to see that in so many ways we're more alike than we are different. So when we're young, we're taught not to stare, right? Don't stare at people. Staring is rude. But why do people stare? People stare because they're looking at something different or something unique or something that they're not expecting to see. And I think that's okay. People are just looking at something and they're trying to learn and understand. And I get this all the time. People stare at me all the time, even when they try to hide it. So I'll be like walking down the street and somebody's walking towards me, they glance at me and then look away. And as soon as they pass me and think that I can't see them anymore, they like turn around and stare. And I'll notice this like in the reflection of a window or something, I can see them do this. But it doesn't bother me. They're just curious, and they're just wondering and looking at something that maybe they don't see all the time. And I actually really love kids for this too, because it's before they know or understand that they're not supposed to stare. So it'll be the same thing, and they'll be walking down the street, and they'll see me, and they'll stop and stare as I go by. And what I always try to do is interact with them in some way to show them that maybe I'm not so different. So I'll wave or say hello, or if we're waiting in line like at the grocery store or something, I'll say like, yeah, this is my wheelchair, isn't it cool? Like, I like it because it's blue. And they're like, yeah, my favorite color is pink. And I'm like, cool, that's great. And the more that we can interact this way, and the more that we can talk to each other, the more that hopefully they will see maybe I'm not so different than them. So much of our lives are shaped through the interactions that we have with each other. We all need to think about the assumptions that we make when we see somebody with a disability, or wearing a hijab, or speaking with an accent, or really who is just different than us in any way. And maybe adjust those things that we first think about, or at least catch ourselves making those snap judgments. There's so much more to each person than what we first see. Everyone has a story. That's something that I try to keep in mind every day. Thank you.